October 12, 2019. Suburban Greenville, South Carolina. A woman sprints across her yard, her voice trembling as she cries for help. Seconds later, a man appears behind her. What happens next is so brutal, so sudden, it shakes the entire neighborhood. And yes, every second was caught on camera. But what happened next shocked everyone. Elizabeth Neal was 34. A teacher, a daughter, and someone her neighbors described as gentle, the kind of person who never raised her voice. She lived in Greenville, a quiet, wooded town where families felt safe leaving their doors unlocked. Jonathan Reagan? He was 36. Once Elizabeth's boyfriend. Known in the area for his charm, but also for a darker side few people dared to talk about. This isn't just another tragedy. This is a case that revealed how fast love can twist into terror right in front of cameras. We post daily. Subscribe so you never miss a case. Elizabeth Neal lived a life that many would describe as ordinary, even comforting. At 34, she was the kind of teacher every student remembered, patient, calm, always slipping an encouraging note onto a struggling child's desk. After school, she walked her golden retriever, Daisy, down the winding streets of her Greenville neighborhood, pausing to chat with the neighbors who admired her easy smile. On the surface, Elizabeth's life looked peaceful. But underneath, there were cracks forming, cracks she tried hard to cover with routine. Her relationship with Jonathan Reagan had once seemed promising. At first he was charming. He brought flowers to her classroom, fixed a broken hinge on her front door, and even told her parents at Sunday dinner that Elizabeth was the best thing that ever happened to him. For a while she believed it. Friends noticed she laughed more, that she seemed lighter. But slowly things shifted. Jonathan grew impatient if she didn't answer his calls right away. He accused her of hiding things when she stayed late at work. At first, Elizabeth brushed it off as concern. But the questions got sharper, the tone darker. By midsummer, the change was undeniable. Jonathan would sit in his car outside her house, waiting for her to return from errands. He questioned her friendships, even her family. And though he never struck her, his words cut deep, reminding her daily that she owed him for everything. Elizabeth confided in her closest colleague, whispering in the break room, "I feel like he's always watching me. Like I can't breathe without him knowing." The colleague urged her to leave. And she did. In September, Elizabeth ended the relationship. Her voice shook when she told him it was over, but she stood her ground. Friends said she looked relieved afterward, like a weight had been lifted. She started smiling more in class again, even signed up to sing with the church choir. But Jonathan didn't let go. His car appeared on her street more than once. A neighbor swore she saw him standing by the edge of Elizabeth's driveway at night, unmoving, just watching. When confronted, Jonathan laughed it off, claiming he'd taken a wrong turn. Elizabeth's parents begged her to move in with them, at least temporarily. But she resisted. "I can't let him scare me out of my own home," she told them. Still, the unease grew. She began locking her doors earlier, drawing her blinds tighter, double-checking the back gate before bed. Daisy, usually quiet, started barking at shadows. Even so, Elizabeth kept pushing forward. She attended dinners with friends, laughed over coffee, planned her lessons with care. She told herself that Jonathan would get bored and move on. But behind her determination, there was a quiet dread. A security camera across the street installed by her neighbor after a recent break-in captured Jonathan's car circling the block more than once. The footage would later become chilling proof that the danger was far closer than Elizabeth realized. Because on the evening of October 12th, her effort to live normally would collide with Jonathan's refusal to let go. And the result would stun not only her neighborhood, but the world. The night of October 12, 2019, began like any other Saturday. Greenville was quiet, the kind of autumn night where the streets seemed to breathe under the faint orange glow of street lamps. Elizabeth Neal had just returned home from choir practice. She fed Daisy, changed into sweatpants, and stepped outside to let her dog out before bed. The security camera across the street clicked on as she opened her front door. Elizabeth looked relaxed, leash in one hand, her other hand tucked into her sweater pocket against the chill. Daisy trotted ahead, tail wagging. But seconds later the mood changed. At the edge of the frame, headlights cut across the street and went dark. The silhouette of a man appeared, moving fast. Jonathan Reagan. Elizabeth froze, then her voice pierced the silence. "Jonathan, go home." Her tone was sharp, filled with fear and defiance. Jonathan ignored her. He stepped into the yard, closing the distance. The camera captured Elizabeth backing away, Daisy barking frantically. Then Elizabeth ran. Her bare feet slapped against the grass as she darted across the lawn, her screams echoing into the night. Neighbors would later testify that they thought it was just kids fooling around until the screaming didn't stop. Jonathan chased her down. The camera's grainy footage showed him lunging forward, tackling Elizabeth near the side of the house. She struggled, kicking, her voice breaking as she shouted for help. Then came the blade. In the footage, you see Jonathan's arm rise and fall in rapid motion. Elizabeth's screams turned into gasps, then silence. Daisy lunged, snapping at Jonathan's leg, but he shoved the dog aside. From inside their homes, neighbors started dialing 911. One woman told dispatch, "Please, there's a man stabbing a woman in the yard. She's screaming. Hurry." Another caller whispered, "I hear a fight. Someone's going to die." By the time the first sirens were heard in the distance, the scene had already grown quiet. Jonathan stood over Elizabeth for several seconds, his chest heaving. Then, as if realizing the inevitability of what he'd done, he bolted. The camera caught him sprinting back to his car, headlights flashing on as he sped away. The footage remained fixed on Elizabeth. She lay motionless in the grass, her sweater torn, her hair spread across the ground like a halo turned dark with blood. Daisy circled her body, whining, nudging her arm with her nose as if begging her to get up. At 9:27 p.m., police cruisers roared into the neighborhood, blue and red lights flooding the quiet street. Officers rushed to Elizabeth's side, but it was too late. Paramedics confirmed what everyone feared: she was gone. Neighbors, shaken and wide-eyed, gathered behind the police tape. Many clutched their children close, whispering to each other, "How could this happen here?" The camera footage was downloaded within the hour. Investigators watched in stunned silence as the events played out in chilling detail. No shadows, no guessing, no missing minutes, everything was there. And one name was already on everyone's lips: Jonathan Reagan. But where had he gone? And how far was he willing to run? The manhunt for Jonathan Reagan began the very night of the murder. Greenville police released a bolo, "Be on the lookout," to every nearby county. His car, a silver Honda Accord with a dented bumper, was last seen speeding onto the highway just minutes after Elizabeth's screams faded into silence. But Jonathan had a head start. By the time officers reached the interstate, he was gone. Inside the Greenville Police Department, detectives gathered in the briefing room. They had chilling evidence in hand: the security footage. It showed not only the attack but the moments leading up to it, his stalking presence, his deliberate pursuit. One investigator would later say, "It was one of the clearest cases of premeditated violence I'd ever seen." He knew exactly what he was doing. Still, they needed more. They needed to prove intent. Detectives began by retracing Jonathan's steps in the weeks before the murder. Surveillance footage from a hardware store surfaced. There he was, lingering in an aisle days earlier, picking up duct tape, rope, and finally a hunting knife. The receipt was time-stamped. The knife? The exact same one found beside Elizabeth's body. But then, another layer emerged. Cell phone records showed Jonathan had called Elizabeth 32 times the day before her death. His internet searches revealed disturbing queries: Greenville police response time, how to disappear without a trace, and do cameras see in the dark? Each one a breadcrumb pointing toward obsession. Detectives interviewed neighbors, friends, colleagues. Every single one described Jonathan as unstable, possessive, jealous. Elizabeth herself had told a co-worker just weeks before, "I think he's following me. I don't feel safe." But Jonathan wasn't just watching. He was planning. The FBI was brought in to assist with digital forensics. They uncovered a hidden folder on his laptop. Inside, dozens of photos of Elizabeth taken without her knowledge. Screenshots of her social media posts. Even a typed document labeled "Ways to Make Her Stay." Yet, despite this damning evidence, Jonathan's defense attorney would later spin a different story. He claimed Jonathan had gone to Elizabeth's house that night to talk things out. That Elizabeth had attacked him first, and that Jonathan acted in panic, not malice. But the autopsy told a different truth. Elizabeth had 14 stab wounds, most to her back. Defensive cuts lined her arms and hands. She had fought for her life, but the wounds showed a pattern of relentless pursuit, not an accident. Detectives presented the evidence to the district attorney: the footage, the knife receipt, the cell phone records. A clear case was forming. But Jonathan was still missing. For 2 weeks, the search stretched across 3 states. Billboards flashed his face. Tips poured in. Some claimed to spot him at gas stations. Others swore he was hiding in abandoned cabins. Then a break. A farmer in rural Georgia reported a silver Honda abandoned in a field. Inside, Jonathan's wallet, his phone smashed, and traces of Elizabeth's blood. But Jonathan himself? Gone. And for investigators, the question became chillingly clear. Was he preparing to surrender, or had he planned to disappear forever? For nearly a month, Jonathan Reagan's name dominated every headline across South Carolina and beyond. The man caught on camera committing one of Greenville's most brutal crimes had vanished into the night. The search stretched across multiple states. Marshals tracked bus stations, truck stops, and backwoods motels. But Jonathan seemed to slip through every net. Some believed he had fled the country. Others whispered that he was hiding in plain sight. Then 3 weeks after Elizabeth Neal's murder, a tip changed everything. A clerk at a small-town gas station in Macon, Georgia, recognized Jonathan's face from a wanted poster. He'd come in at dawn, wearing a hoodie pulled low, buying nothing but water and energy bars. The clerk quietly called police after he left. Within hours, U.S. Marshals swarmed the area. Jonathan was found hiding in a storage shed behind an abandoned property, curled on a mattress of rags. He was arrested without a fight. Officers later said he looked exhausted, gaunt, and resigned, like he knew his time had finally run out. Back in Greenville, the community exhaled. Elizabeth's parents wept when they heard the news. Her father told reporters, "At least now he can't hurt anyone else." But the real fight was only beginning. In 2021, Jonathan Reagan went on trial for first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed. Friends, family, reporters, and neighbors filled every seat. The prosecution wasted no time. They showed the footage from that October night, frame by frame. The jurors watched in silence, some covering their mouths as Elizabeth's final moments played out before them. Then came the receipts, the knife purchase, the rope, the duct tape, his internet searches, the folder of photographs. Every piece painted the same story. This was not an accident. This was obsession spiraling into murder. But Jonathan's defense clung to their version. They claimed he had gone to reconcile, that Elizabeth had struck him first in fear, and that he had panicked. They argued that it wasn't premeditated, but a tragic fight that went too far. The prosecution dismantled that argument piece by piece. The medical examiner testified about Elizabeth's 14 stab wounds, most in her back. These were not the actions of a man defending himself, she said. These were the actions of someone determined to end a life. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jonathan Reagan, guilty of murder in the first degree. Elizabeth's mother sobbed as the verdict was read. Daisy, the golden retriever who had been by Elizabeth's side that night, sat quietly at her sister's home, now a living link to the life that had been stolen. The judge sentenced Jonathan to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his days behind concrete walls, never again to walk freely through the neighborhoods he once prowled. But for Elizabeth's community, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice was served. Yet the haunting truth remained. A young woman full of kindness and light was gone forever. And the security camera footage, grainy, brutal, unforgettable, would remain a permanent reminder of how quickly obsession can turn deadly. Jonathan Reagan's actions fit a well-documented psychological pattern. Coercive control escalating into fatal violence. From the earliest days of their relationship, Jonathan showed signs of possessive jealousy, demanding constant updates, questioning Elizabeth's whereabouts, and trying to isolate her from friends. To many, these behaviors might seem like clinginess or insecurity. But in criminal psychology, they are red flags. Experts call it intimate partner surveillance, a stage where the abuser begins monitoring and controlling every aspect of the victim's life. When Elizabeth ended the relationship, Jonathan's behavior escalated. This is known as the separation assault window. Studies show that victims are at the highest risk of violence right after leaving a controlling partner. For someone like Jonathan, Elizabeth's independence wasn't just rejection, it was a direct blow to his fragile sense of dominance. His obsessive behaviors, stalking, repeated phone calls, circling her home, photographing her without consent, reflect what criminologists label pathological fixation. In his mind, Elizabeth wasn't a partner, she was property slipping out of his control. The crime itself also reveals his state of mind. 14 stab wounds, many to the back, suggest overkill, a level of violence far beyond what's needed to cause death. Overkill often signals deep personal rage, an emotional storm where the killer loses all restraint. It wasn't about silencing Elizabeth. It was about punishing her. Jonathan's failed self-defense claim speaks volumes. Abusers often rewrite the narrative to appear as victims themselves. This distortion is part denial, part manipulation, or refusal to accept responsibility. Psychologists call it cognitive reframing, a tactic to maintain control even when confronted with undeniable evidence. At its core, Jonathan's psychology was driven by entitlement and control. He couldn't tolerate rejection. He couldn't imagine a world where Elizabeth lived free from his shadow. And when that illusion shattered, his rage turned lethal. For experts in domestic violence prevention, Elizabeth's case is tragically familiar. It highlights the dangerous myth that abuse only matters when it leaves visible bruises. In reality, the warning signs surveillance, intimidation, obsession were already pointing toward violence long before October 12th. Elizabeth's murder, captured on camera, forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Obsession is not love. Control is not care. And when red flags are ignored, they can turn deadly. Elizabeth Neal's story is more than just another headline. It is a chilling reminder of how quickly obsession can masquerade as love, and how silence in the face of warning signs can turn deadly. Her laughter in the classroom, her warmth with friends, her devotion to family, all of it was cut short in a single night of violence. And though her killer now sits behind prison walls, the security camera footage ensures that the world will never forget the horror of what happened in her own front yard. Elizabeth's case forces us to ask, how many more signs go unnoticed every day? And how many lives could be saved if we learn to see them in time? Thank you for watching Behind the Crime. Subscribe now.